Well, we learned today that the United States Supreme Court has two different kinds of justices. Justices who are trying to protect the Constitution and the law, and justices who appear to be trying to protect the president, specifically the former president named Trump. That is the fundamental dividing line that seemed to emerge on the court today, with Justice Samuel Alito, as usual, running away with wild flights of fancy about what would happen to presidents if the Supreme Court doesn't provide them with some form of new protection that has never existed before. Justice Alito was placed on the Supreme Court, in effect, by the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court decided in the 2000 presidential election in favor of George W. Bush, who came in second in the voting of the American people, but came in first in a 5-4 decision in the Supreme Court. Because George W. Bush, who lost the popular vote and was awarded the Electoral College by the Supreme Court, became president, he was then able to put Samuel Alito on the Supreme Court. Samuel Alito, in his opinion overturning Roe versus Wade, quoted judges in England long before the United States of America existed, who were prosecutors of witches before they became judges, who were then in the business of sentencing witches to death as judges. Samuel Alito thought they were worthy of quoting. In his opinion, removing the right to safe health care services in this country for women. Today, Samuel Alito imagined that without some new form of immunity written by the United States Supreme Court, every future president will be prosecuted by the new Justice Department that takes over after the president leaves office. In making that prediction, Samuel Alito was able to ignore the entire history of the United States of America prior to the criminal rampaging of Donald Trump in the White House. Justice Neil Gorsuch, whose seat on the Supreme Court was procedurally stolen by Republican Senator Mitch McConnell, who stole it away from President Obama's constitutional right to appoint the justice, held the seat open long enough so that Donald Trump could put Neil Gorsuch in that seat. Neil Gorsuch, who should be embarrassed every time he takes his seat on the Supreme Court, joined in the invented scenario of every president being prosecuted by the administration of his or her successor forever in the future. Even though that has only happened to one president, which proves that the one president those Republican justices care about is Donald Trump. They repeatedly tried to say that their entire concern was focused on the future, imaginary presidents, all of whom would appoint attorneys general who would become prosecutorial abusers of former presidents. Samuel Alito declared from the bench of the Supreme Court of the United States that the grand jury system in America does not work. It's one thing for flippant pundits on TV to use the overdone, cliched phrase about grand juries who will indict a ham sandwich if prosecutors want them to. It is another thing entirely for a Supreme Court justice to say that same thing, to use that pornographic, legally, ham sandwich example in the Supreme Court, which is exactly what Samuel Alito disgracefully did from the bench of the Supreme Court today. He willfully insulted every member of every Trump grand jury that has returned every indictment against Donald Trump. The team of judges trying to protect Donald Trump today came up against the newest member of the United States Supreme Court who was trying to protect the Constitution. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson interrupted the questioning of Donald Trump's lawyer early in the hearing with this.
You suggested that the lack of immunity and the possibility of prosecution in the presidential context is like an innovation. And I understood it to be the status quo. I mean, I understood that every president from the beginning of time, essentially, has understood that there was a threat of prosecution, if for no other reason than the Constitution suggests that they can be prosecuted after impeachment. The Office of Legal Counsel has said forever that presidents are amenable to a threat of prosecution, and they have continued to function and do their jobs and do all the things that presidents do. So it seems to me that you are asking now for a change in what the law is related to immunity. Everybody has thought, including the presidents who've held the office, that they were taking this office subject to potential criminal prosecution. No?
I don't. I see the opposite. I see all the evidence going the other way. Marbury against Madison, Mississippi against Johnson discussed this broad immunity principle that naturally.
So what was up with the pardon? What was up with the pardon for President Nixon?
I think
that if everybody thought that presidents couldn't be prosecuted, then what was that about?
Well, he was under investigation for both private and public conduct at the time, official acts and private conduct.
Same with Donald Trump. Exactly the same. Later in the hearing, Justice Jackson imagined what could happen if the Supreme Court gives presidents even more legal protection than they have now.
If someone with those kinds of powers, the most powerful person in the world, with the greatest amount of authority, could go into office knowing that there would be no potential penalty for committing crimes, I'm trying to understand what the disincentive is from turning the Oval Office into, the seat of criminal activity in this country. If the potential for criminal liability is taken off the table, wouldn't there be a significant risk that future presidents would be emboldened to commit crimes with abandon while they're in office? Presidents from the beginning of time have understood that that's a possibility. That might be what has kept this office from turning into the kind of crime center that I'm envisioning. But once we say, no criminal liability, Mr. President, you can do whatever you want, I'm worried that we would have a worse problem than the problem of the president feeling constrained to follow the law while he's in office.